Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
This week, we go into the generic world of fantasy in Eragon.
You did that one last time.
Yeah, I'm keeping it consistent. Welcome to Medium Shift. Eragon, the movie.
We're not doing names?
Not the game. Oh yeah, we can introduce ourselves too. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev, but apparently none of that matters.
Nothing matters, Evan. Have you not decided that yet?
Oh, so this movie really hit you hard then?
Just a little bit. Like, I mean, people talk about something really hitting you in the childhood in many respects, and this is one of those films. Not for the way you may expect, but we'll get into that later. Right, so Eragon the movie. I'll just read the quick synopsis from IMDb. In his homeland of Allegasia, a farm boy happens upon a dragon egg, a discovery that leads him on a predestined journey where he can realize he's the one person who can defend his home against an evil king.
And for the description of the book, Eragon, it's that, but bigger and longer.
Yes.
And better.
As books to film adaptations go. So, I mean, you've already let the cat out of the bag. We think the book for this movie is better. As do most people, I think. I'm yet to actually meet someone who prefers this to the book. I mean, I initially... It's weird. Anyway, we'll get into that. But what do you think of the movie itself?
Okay, I'll tell you a story to begin with.
We'll start with the story.
When this movie first came out, it was interesting because it was around the time that I was reading the book as the movie had announced. I thought, oh, this is finally good. I'm going to be able to watch a movie after having read the book. I'm not much of a reader, so that was sort of a new experience for me, and I never got into like the Harry Potters or anything. So this was all very big. And I basically, when I finished the book, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go see the movie. I was going to go with friends. We decided against it, though, because we saw just a big plaster for a 1-star aggravated review. And I thought, oh, damn it. Let's not ruin what we got. Which was mighty impressive for a bunch of people who had just started high school.
Yeah, that's rather interesting. One of the few times that reviews actually matter, according to some people. So
Exactly. So yeah, that having watched it now in preparation for this podcast, I'm very glad at young me for not having to do this. Upset because instead of seeing that, I think we ended up seeing Master of Disguise, which was god-awful.
How would you compare the two exactly?
If I had to compare the two of them, I'd end up going with Eragon. Because
wow.
at least that had some action scenes and was not too racially stereotypical.
No, fair point. I mean, still, that's a surprisingly mature decision for that age, honestly. I never would have done that myself. I was, especially as a young child, I'm exactly what studio executives were looking for. If I saw a name that I recognized, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go see it. So, this wasn't actually one of those cases. I was foolish enough when this film came out to actually see it. Although at the time, I didn't even know it was a book. I just ended up seeing the movie. I'm like, oh yeah, that was just like a fun fantasy movie. I didn't actually hate it the first time I saw it. Although I should clarify, I was quite young when I actually did. But then after that, I ended up going to read the books, the entire series, I should say, and then went back to watch the movie and realized, yeah, okay, this is pretty bad, which is something I didn't necessarily recognize at the time because I was young and stupid. But in hindsight, this is not a good movie for a number of respects. I think there are elements in here that I like. I think those elements are few and far between. And overall, I think it's a really just generic, flat, and forgettable experience, which is a shame because I'm a big fan of the book series. Maybe not the first book, actually. I think the first book is maybe the weakest of the whole series. Like, I love sort of what they do with the follow-ups, but even so, it's disappointing. It's very disappointing. This series deserved more.
Yeah, I agree, and one of my biggest issues, though, actually doesn't stem from it being too different, from being, like, different to the book, or being, you know, very generic, as you keep calling it. My biggest issue is sort of coming from, like, their sense of timing and how plot flows. There seems like a lot of time where it's just skeleton information, and if something major has to happen, it happens instantaneously. There's no real sense of time or grasp. It's sort of just... It feels like they're just trying to hit specific points and not caring about how they sort of get there.
And it feels rushed in doing so. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I think you make a really great point, actually, when you talk about like if a big scene has to happen, it immediately goes to it. Because the one thing that really frustrated me with this movie was that every scene tried to feel important or grand or significant in some way. And then, as Syndrome says, if everything is significant, then nothing is. Like, eventually you just get desensitized to that sort of grand scale that it's going for. And it's just meaningless. Like, you know, once you get to the 5th or 6th scene when it's like a magical ride through the clouds on the back of a dragon, you're like, yeah, but you've done this so many times before. Like, dramatic tensions to sort of like ebb and flow in a film. And I really don't think this movie succeeds in doing that at all, which really contributes to how flat it feels.
Yeah, a key example that I think illustrates this wonderfully in the movie. It's wonderful in the fact that it explains exactly what I was saying. It's horrible that the fact that this happens.
Sure.
But the spoiler alert, death of Brom.
Oh, yes.
Which, I don't know, when I'm watching that, it just sort of happens almost out of the blue. And you don't have that same emotional investment as you would in any other movie or in the book. In the book, you're there with the full journey. You've been with him town to town, basically since the start. You've seen that sort of evolution flow. In other movies where you have a major hero die, there's been a lot of this sort of build-up beforehand. This, it's sort of just like, he's, for some reason, jumping on. They're traveling. He's jumped in randomly to take a spear.
Oh, yeah.
And then they moved on.
And then that's it.
Yeah, and it was very quick. I had to get to the next major development, which was the introduction of the other character in Murtor, I think? Yeah, something like that. But yeah. No, I don't know, I'm going by how it was written.
Oh, sure. Yes. We should always go by how it is written. That's how it is written.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that as well. Like, I mean, I kind of felt like they were trying to build up to a Boromir level death without any of the sort of emphasis or significance of it. And it really just falls flat. Like, I mean, I remember at the time, first time I saw it, I'm going to be going back to that experience a lot. But I remember sort of kind of being sad, but not because I was invested in the character, it's just because I liked Jeremy Irons. I'm like, hey, he's a cool guy. So, yeah. And that's the only real investment I had in him. I couldn't tell you anything beyond that, just being the stereotype of the grumpy old guy who shepherds the hero along on his journey. Like, it's the wise mentor that's been in every single hero's journey movie ever. So, and I didn't think he had any significance beyond that. So when he dies, it means nothing.
I had that exact same feeling, and the exact same reason I felt sad, purely because this movie lacked now Jeremy Irons, which was one of the few good points it had going for it.
Yeah, it loses its best actor and has like a terrible emotional beat, and then just keeps going from there. And it just kind of sucks. Yeah, I mean, really, when I was trying to figure out what exactly the core problem with this movie was, I ended up just going back to the creative team. So this was a first-time director. This was a screenwriter that had only ever written one movie before it, which was Jurassic Park 3, which gave us the amazing Alan moment, if, you know, you need a bit of a retrospect, and then starred a guy who had never acted before in his life. So really, there's no experience here. They're trying to immediately start off a franchise with people who don't understand it, and it just flopped, and there's not much more to it. Like, you know, even just looking on paper before this film came out, you could see all the hallmarks of this movie was not going to be good.
And it's a real shame too, because Ed Spielers, who plays Eragon in the movie, he was very fresh, very new face in the acting scene, hadn't done much, like you said, working with a director that was his first, and I think only directorial.
Only. He was actually initially a visual effects artist for a number of years, and he went back to that after this movie, funnily enough. But yeah, he hasn't directed anything since.
And you could see he really was trying his absolute best. And Jeremy Irons was helping him along as much as he could in their scenes. And there were some moments where it actually seemed like there was a real emotional commitment to that.
It wasn't for lack of trying, at least. Yeah.
He did his absolute best, and I commend him for that, but he just didn't have enough to work with to make a good first impression. And when you don't have that experience, if you don't have a good platform to begin with, no foundation, you're going to fall flat no matter what you do.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. I don't necessarily blame him. I sort of blame everything around him that led to that bad performance, honestly. And apparently he has gone on to do better things. Like, he had a significant role in Downton Abbey, which I haven't seen, so I can't speak to how good he was in that. But I assume if you, like... He's sort of one of those actors, if you put the right people around him, then he's probably going to give a good performance. He's not necessarily a bad actor, it's just... he gets dragged down by everything else. And I almost felt the same way for Jeremy Irons. Jeremy Irons kind of transcended that for a little bit in the way Ed Spielers couldn't, but even him was sort of like trapped in the muck, basically. Same with John Malkovich, and basically the same with everyone in this movie. I don't think there's really too many terrible actors in this film. They're all just given really, really crappy dialogue and characters to work with.
Jeremy Irons is basically... the one thing he did compared to everyone else was the fact that he did his well enough to make everyone else just look a little worse.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I feel like just purely just because you're now focused on his performance, you sort of ignore sort of what's happening else, because he has enough of a presence and a charisma on screen to sort of make you forget, which, you know, if it's a terrible movie, that's sort of a good thing because you're focused on him and then you forget everything else. It works best in big movies where he's sharing a lot of that space because he can go off other people, and when you don't have that other person to bounce off him, then you lose it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So, shall we move on to the book then? Or the books, but we're mostly just going to be focusing on the first one. Yeah,
given that this was meant to be the first of a trilogy, and the book was the first of a 4-part trilogy.
Yes, because apparently the last book was so big that he had to split it into 2 parts. Well deserved, I think, but even so. What do you think of the book then? You've already mentioned it briefly, but...
Yeah, well, this was one that I read when I was quite young, and I was absolutely enthralled by it. I still have the book somewhere, and you can see it's all tattered and falling to pieces just because I kept flicking back and forth between pages, reading the bits that I love. And it's one that really sort of... it speaks to that young audience really well. I think probably because the author was quite young when he wrote the first draft himself.
Yeah, he was still a teenager.
And, you know, that leads to some, arguments of derision and how much of it is an influence and how much is almost direct story elements taken. But for a young adult or tween of my age, as I was, yeah, I hit those words too. But it's the best way to describe it, and it was targeted to me, and I loved it. Well, not me specifically, but to my demographic, and I think it really hit a home run for that. Yeah,
for sure. No, I would totally agree. I had a similar experience. Obviously, as I mentioned, I read it after I initially saw the film, and I really, really liked it. In hindsight, looking back, I feel like I wouldn't have enjoyed it too much or as much as an adult, because it is very, very derivative when it comes to that. But when you're young, when you don't have so many experiences with that kind of story, it feels fresh and new and exciting, and it just feels sort of classical and legendary. And I think, as you said, like, it appealed perfectly well to the right demographic, and we ate it up. Like, it wasn't just you and me when we were kids who liked it. Like, I know so many people who are in love with that series just as much as we are, and have like a fondness for it. Like, in many respects, I'm the same in that I didn't read Harry Potter growing up, but Eragon was one of those book series that was kind of like that for me. Just one of those big centerpiece, fictional narratives from my childhood that I still really enjoy today. So even if I can look back and see its flaws, I don't know. There's something special about your first hero's journey.
It managed to get a really good balance between what was told and what was left to your imagination, which is really what you need in those kinds of books. Because I just remember being transported to a world. My imagination at the time wasn't as developed as it is now, and so what's with the eyebrows?
No, nothing. Continue. Wasn't any implication in those words. It's fine. Continue.
So, no. So, at the time, my experiences and my imagination probably wasn't as well developed and defined as it is now, because I didn't have all that stuff, but it was building. And so, with enough of a prompt, the childhood innocence part of the imagination was enough to go wild. And I remember just picturing grand battles in my head, watching dragons fly along, all while I'm sitting in the chair reading and not trying to annoy the people next to me.
Oh, what a classic childhood memory.
Yes.
Yeah, it was great. I remember my parents were always concerned when I was younger that the books were going to hurt my neck, because especially the last couple were basically bricks, essentially. And I remember I carried around Brissinger. After it came out, I got it immediately, ended up reading it in, like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days. And for those 3 or 4 days, it just never left my side. I'd literally just be carrying it around, and eventually my mum just started referring to it as my brick. Because it came everywhere with me. I'll take it out on trams, I'll take it down to the car, I'll just be lying on my bed, I'll take it out. And it was just real good. Real enjoyed it. So yeah.
So let's stem this conversation before we get too nostalgic and...
Aww. But nostalgia is
crazy.
the best kind and so easy to manipulate. Alright. So let's get into the similarities with the film then, shall we? Because
Yes.
there's a decent amount to pick apart.
Yes, we should, again, state, like we have in past episodes, we're not going to get everything, because there was a lot of differences, a lot of changes.
There's too many details. We're going to be hitting the big points that we think are worth discussing, but as with every sort of adaptation, especially with something as extensive as a book to a film, there's always going to be things left out that we just can't touch on everything. So going on from there, what is the first major difference that you wish to speak about?
Probably my biggest issue, and I'll bring this up again in my Do It Differently, was the fact that it was, in the book, it is a journey, and in the movie, it simply wasn't. There was not enough happening. They basically condensed as much as they could to localized areas. So, and I understand why they sort of did that, because, you know, there's only so much you can contain in 90 minutes of movie. You know, you kind of expect to see something a little bit more. You don't want to see just one single town, and then you're at your final destination when it comes to something as grand as this sort of fantasy journey that you go on. In the book, you're hitting various different places. You're hitting different areas. Forests, the desert, towns made of wood and stone, dwarven settlements, marble cities. There's this grand sort of journey you go on that you grow with your characters. And the movie, in order to fit in time, they cut everything down. They basically contained all the towns into basically the one small location where all the major events happened in that one section. Then there's a bit more travel. Then there's the small section of the bad guys area, and then a little bit more travel, and then final destination. So I think that's probably the biggest one I'd sort of pull out of that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think what you're sort of touching on there is the often problem, especially with really extensive books being turned into films, in that they just can't adapt all the material that makes the movie or the book special. Like, it's really difficult, but it's kind of like cutting out... Books are so great in that they can have such a immaculately extensive world and story and so on and so forth, and you can fit so much more in a book than you can with a movie. And so going book to film, I think this is one of those examples, and I think there are a lot of other examples of a movie that just doesn't adapt well. And it really, as you said, just a lot of it sort of gets lost along the way. And unfortunately, that happens to the best books and the worst books, but it's just part of the adaptation process. If they don't really want to go out there and make a 5-hour movie, like this isn't Lord of the Rings. So unfortunately, yeah, things are going to get cut.
Yeah, I do want to say, I don't have a problem with lots of things being cut from book to film. I think if it's done well, it's always in the best interest to streamline things. I just feel, in this particular case, the way they went about it was not strong enough in order to justify those changes.
Sure. No, I can totally agree with that. Yeah. No, it's hard. It's really hard.
Well, we can also bring up the fact that they cut out a lot of the characters and changed the characterization of some of the ones that were in there to sort of fit that change. I think, especially when you look in the last third of the movie.
Oh, yeah, true.
There's a lot of characters that they sort of had to cut out there due to time, which would generally be okay if it wasn't the fact that it sort of left plots hanging and really didn't set themselves up well for the future movies.
Yeah, I remember that part of the book, and it was almost like an exposition fest when he initially gets to the spot with the Varden, because you introduce so many people who become critical players in the next movie, but obviously that wouldn't... in the next book, but obviously they wouldn't be able to do that in the movie, because, it's in the third act, it's time for the big battle at the end and all that, and you can't suddenly be introducing all these major characters. And so, yeah, in doing that, it's going to lose a lot of it, unfortunately. And I would have been really interested to see how they sort of adapted that if the franchise did continue, if you go into Eldest, because so much of the groundwork for Eldest was set up in that last third of the book, and in cutting that out, you lose a lot of the groundwork for that film. So I really don't know how well it would have worked, honestly. Yeah. It's a shame. There's a lot about that third act that was changed as well. I mean, we talked about this off mic briefly before, but the giant shadow monster at the end with the shade and all that, that's all for the movie. And we have some mixed feelings on that, shall we say.
Yeah. While it works visually, I feel it feels grand for the sake of being grand, in my opinion. In the book, it was just the two of them fighting on the ground in a classic sword battle, maybe moving about the city a bit. And the final piercing blow comes when Saphira, the dragon, flies over, distracts the shade, and the shade gets the sword through the heart.
Yep, gets vampired.
Whereas this, it was, look, he can create giant shadow monsters in a power that we didn't know he had before.
Yep. Because of course.
Yep. And now there's big fight scene, Smoke Monster vs. Dragon, and they've flung him with the dragon's tail has flicked up, and he's dived and stabbed the guy and given the pithy one-liner and fallen, and then that's it.
Then that's it. Yeah. No, I mean, on paper, I understand how the idea works, in that they want a much more cinematic fight, and especially involving Saphira, which is obviously the big CGI centerpiece of the movie. In that makes a lot of sense. I just kind of wish it was done in a different way that didn't have a Deus Ex Machina with a shade creating something that he should not be able to create, just to make some weird sort of particle effects heavy CGI sequence in the sky. So on paper, I think there's actually a lot of potential in that idea. I just kind of like, as you were saying before, they just didn't execute it well.
Yeah.
So it's a real shame. So speaking of the shade as well, actually, to segue, I would like to move on to him actually, because frankly, I think he's one of my biggest disappointments going from the book to the film.
Okay.
And as much as I like Robert Carlyle, who plays Durza in the movie, he's just not good in this role. Like, he tries to be charming, and he tries to be sinister, and he tries to be, like, smarmy, and none of it works. Like, he's just so generic and flat. And part of that is obviously he's, being given bad material. But he's been so, like, especially in, like, Trainspotting and Trainspotting 2, Robert Carlyle is such a magnetic and energetic actor, and none of that is here. He's just completely wasted and just behind all this bad makeup and particle effects, and it's really disappointing considering the shade is like, I don't know, the big bad of the first book basically. So he's basically Eragon's Darth Vader in that respect, whereas like you have Galbatorix as the Emperor behind him. So, but he's never really given that level of weight that he had in the series. So it's a shame.
And speaking of Galbatorix, it's another interesting point.
Oh, yes.
In the book, it was basically the sinister figure. You didn't know really anything about him in the first Eragon book. Kind of odd now thinking back to it.
I mean, but we didn't learn much about the Emperor in the first Star Wars movie, so
but it created a presence, and you learnt enough about the politics and everything behind it. Whereas I felt in the movie, John Malkovich was just sort of there. He was in a couple of scenes, and that's about it. It almost seemed like he's the part that could have been cut out and just mentioned. But for some reason, they kept that in and cut out other places.
Yeah, it's just... He feels wasted, frankly. And I like John Malkovich and other things, but in here he just shows up and then over-pronunciates some exposition and then leaves, and then that's it. And he makes zero impression. And it's just kind of sad, really, considering how intimidating a presence he is in the books. To see him as just this sort of wimpy bold guy who's trying to act serious but never really works, it just doesn't work at all. So, and you're right, that could have been completely cut. I mean, we might not have even had to see Galbatorix. We could have just heard whispers about him. But no, just we had to see him every now and then, deliver exposition to Durza, and then, go and stand in front of that map. I mean, what else did he do beyond that? Like, he never left that room. That's literally his entire arc in the film. He's just, I'm standing in front of this map. I'm going to sit down for a bit now. I'm standing again. Oh, Durza's back. Going to speak a bit to him. No, I'm going to stand again. Oh, no, something bad happened, so I'm going to cut the map. And there was a dragon in there the entire time? I mean, seriously, why am I keeping my dragon behind a map? Like, am I feeding it? Am I taking it out for walks? Do dragons need walks? Do they fly? Like, he must have been so cramped back there as like a cave space. Like, there's so many questions. It's just a mess. And all of that could have been cut.
So you're not really a fan of sequel Hook the Dragon?
No. To put it bluntly, no. That's like the most cringe-worthy Masters of the Universe painful sequel prep like imaginable. There could have been so many other interesting ways to try and set up for a sequel. But no, there's a black dragon! A black dragon that the beginning of the movie literally told us he had! Like, seriously, why are they playing this off as a surprise? It's one of the first lines of the film! He was a freaking dragon rider! Oh, Christ.
If you're going to bring a sequel hook, would I recommend bringing in the twins, maybe?
The twins?
From the book.
Yeah. That
The
would
psychic ones, right?
Yeah, that would have been better. Would have been better. Oh.
You okay?
Yeah.
You calm?
Yeah, I needed to get that out of my system. Thanks. Okay. Moving on.
So, do you want to do it differently?
Quickly, I want to lament one more thing, actually, but the Razak, which is another big change from the book to the films. Once again, about the villains. This movie really didn't get the villains right, did it?
No.
Funnily enough. So, yeah, what do you think of the Razak, or swarms, more likely they call it in this film?
I was watching the movie, and when they sort of came up, my initial thoughts back to the book were, I don't remember a whole lot in the movie about they were being described this way, or the fact that they were just a bit more sort of hidden in the shadows and there was a bit more of lent to my own imagination. Rather than just, I did not realize there were generic orcs in this movie.
Yeah.
And that just sort of, they were there, and then a few of them came in and they died, and then a couple more later on, surprise attack, and they kept going.
Yeah, they're pretty much just thugs, basically. Not much more beyond that. I don't know if they're necessarily supposed to be orcs. I kind of read it as they're like a swarm of like sentient insects or something like that the desert creates to send them out, because they are sort of like writhing around in the body and things like that. And I think the visual design is interesting. I mean, it is very different from the book. In the book, they're sort of like these bird-like creatures that fear, I think it's water and sunlight, and their work is sort of like maybe shadowed assassins, where in this they're basically just running around in broad daylight.
Surprise!
Trying to stab people. Surprise!
I'm jumping from a tree.
Whoa, you didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Oh, sir.
I went with orcs because they sort of gave off that sort of generic fantasy vibe.
I mean, they fit the exact same template as orcs. They don't achieve anything beyond that, which is a shame. So, I mean, I sort of appreciate that they tried to change around the visual design, but they're so much more significant in the book. Also in the book, they don't die until Brisinga, till Eragon finally hunts them down. Whereas in this, they surprise them, and then they get stabbed, and then they die, and then that's it. Also, that's another thing, actually. He kills one of them by hanging them from a tree, but if it's like a sentient swarm of insects, how can you hang one of them? They don't have a neck to break? Like,
Okay, it sounds a rant again.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. It's so stupid.
The weirdest thing I just sort of want to bring up in terms of the villains is there were basically the other foot soldier orc-like creatures that had the big fangs and you could clearly see their face and that.
Oh, yeah.
They came up later, and they were, in the books, they're known as the
Urukai?
Not Urukai, that's a different franchise.
Oh, my bad. I'm mixing up my fantasy.
But they were brought in as another race, and they had their own issues. They were dealing with but they were...
Urgles,
that's the one.
There you go. Yeah, cool. Similar.
Yeah. But they had their own thing of they were promised land that was taken from them by Galtrax, and they were trying to fight to get their land back by fighting off the resistance and all that. In this, they just seemed like henchmen, and it was hard to differentiate between them and the
Razak.
Why do you keep saying Rava? Where's that coming from?
Ooh.
I don't know.
Maybe it's your Italian roots. Because it sounds like ravioli.
That's racist.
That's
and
a
I'm
connection.
ignoring you.
Okay, sure.
But no, the Razak and those creatures, they didn't seem like there was any sort of distinction aside from how they looked between the two. And it's like, are they the same as those are? Are these new people? What's their deal? They've sort of just appeared. Yeah. And I think that's
true. They're just generic, basically. Where in the books they have so much more character and history. Because, like, I don't remember all of it exactly in the books, but they lay eggs and they've got a secret keep somewhere and they're the last of their species and they're from another continent. There's all this backstory to it. But in this, Doza just summons them, kill the boy, and they try to kill the boy and then they die and then that's it. The end. Everything sucks.
Which I'd be okay with, given that it's a movie. You can trim backstory a bit, but not so much that they just appear and you have no idea why.
Yeah.
At least have enough to say, these are these people, they came from here, this is why they're helping us.
Yeah, you can trim, just don't trim the basics. You still need the basics in there for it to make sense.
Trimming is getting rid of branches, not the entire trunk.
Ah, yes. Good metaphor. I'm going to remember that. Right, now that I've got that out of my system, shall we move it on to do it differently?
We shall.
Okay.
Jingle, jingle, jingle.
Nailed it. Alright, so, I believe I went first last week, so
I will take the reins this time.
Yes.
So, pitch time. First and foremost, I'm basically going to cut out things from the book as well. I'm just sort of replacing it with what I feel should have gone in the movie as well. Mm-hmm. So, people are going to be opinionated about this. Of course they are. Just hear me out.
Suck it up.
First off, that opening narration and battle scene with the dragons, that's gone. That'll appear later in the movie. And more of it. So we start off instead straight in with Eragon hunting and the throwing back between his hunt and the hunt of Arya by...
Elizabeth Rose.
No. Her name is Sienna Gilroy.
Yeah, close enough.
So she's going through the woods riding to a horse with a magical stone, and Eragon is hunting, riding on a donkey. I don't know. I want the parallel, but I don't know if he's rich enough for a horse.
No.
So, but
sure
you're sort of cutting between the two, and you see sort of the animals... Actually, sorry, I take that back. You see the cut between Arya on her horse and a deer, and you see in the background shadowy figures getting ready to hunt.
A shadowy shade.
Okay.
Continue. Just put a bit of input in there.
And so you have that parallel. And one of the big things I first want to change is the Shade and the Razak. You don't see as much of them as you do in the original movie.
Okay.
My basic point is you don't even really see the Razak, you just see the shadows and silhouettes coming in and out. And like you said, acting more as a silent assassin. Mm-hmm. Sort of coming in, like take out the guard on the left, take out the guard on the right. And you have, enveloped by a lot of shadow and in a more sort of grandiose way, you have Durza sort of come in and basically just say, you have what's ours. Arya just goes, fuck you, in more elegant and fantasy style. Fuck thyself, maybe. I don't know.
A plague on your houses.
Exactly.
Yep.
And basically teleports the egg, and then you cut back to Eragon basically finding that egg. Mm-hmm. Taking that back, and then you basically cut a lot of the home life, I'd say, in a weird test. You still have him introduced to his uncle and his cousin, but you don't get... The cousin is basically, as he's coming back, the cousin's leaving. So get rid of some of that filler and just sort of say, the guards are coming, I've got to leave, basically. And that's sort of cut for time, sort of keep things moving ahead. Because I just really want to get to that journey bit as quickly as possible, essentially. So, you have that, and you have Eragon go out, he runs into Brom, and instead of Brom almost getting arrested and Eragon having to sneak into his house and read and a whole back and forth, you basically have more like in the book where Brom just explains sort of to Eragon and to some of the drunkards laying around the bar the story of the Dragon Riders and the war, and that's where you bring in the opening scene. So instead of it just being narrated by omnipresent voice, it's actually in story being narrated by Bronn from his perspective, and you sort of follow in this flashback what you don't know as his perspective at this point, but at a later date realize that it was him, sort of, because at this point you don't know that he's a Dragon Rider as well. So he goes through, you have that opening narration. It's a bit more grandiose, bit more action intense, just because you need sort of something like that at this point in the movie to keep the audience's attention,
sure.
Especially if they're youngins.
We are dim-witted fools.
Yes. Why do you gotta make things so insulting?
Pessimistic.
But then, basically, soon after that, you have the egg has hatched, Eragon is sort of raising the dragon, and I want to make it clear that one of my big problems was how instantaneous the dragon sort of grew up. There's a little bit of playing at the start, then he's big, then he starts flying, then she starts flying, and then when she comes back in, she's fully grown and able to communicate telepathically with Eragon. Sure. So a lot of that is what I'm changing here. And I'm basically... Saphira is going to basically remain young and untelepathic. I think it'd be interesting enough if, instead of just dealing with more exposition-based dialogue, a lot of the communication between Eragon and Saphira is sort of non-verbal. Sort of acting like human would with a dog, basically. You sort of learn from body language and just a few sort of off quotes what they're sort of thinking. And you sort of develop that psychic link that they have, but not so direct as in, oh, now I can talk to you. And I know exactly what your name is, and you now know what my name is.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
let me deliver more exposition.
Yeah, which is, again, one of the big issues. So you have Eragon or even Brom be the one that calls Saphira, because Saphira's not talking at this point. And you have them sort of, instead of just coming back, seeing the Razak torturing the Butcher and then being chased off and then run back, cutting a lot of that out and basically streamlining it into Eragon comes back after meeting with Brom to find his entire place is on fire and his uncle is dead. And he's like, what the fuck? What's going on? Saphira comes in and basically whisks him away very quickly. Mm-hmm. But without the expositional dialogue of, oh yeah, I'm taken away because those bad guys and they're coming to hunt you. And then a lot of that debate. It's just Saphira goes off and is like, oh, okay, I guess you know there's danger around or something. They hide off, they come back, and then they head off with Brom. So all that is basically the first 20 minutes to half an hour. Mm-hmm. From then on, you'll basically follow in a sort of a halfway point between scene changes and a montage. You're sort of following Brom and Eragon as they travel town to town, just trying to get to the Boer Mountains, I believe they're called.
Yeah, something like that.
Where they'll find the resistance. Mm-hmm. So you focus more on those two as they sort of travel. For a little bit, you don't get anything from Durza, or you don't see anything of Galvatorix,
Yep.
yes. It's a hard name to say.
No, sure.
So you don't see anything. In fact, Galvatorix, it's a shadow with eyes. Ooh. And there's you don't see him. You don't see his throne room. You just see Durza basically occasionally trying to telepathically talk to him or be commanded by. Mm-hmm. That's about it. So he's a shadowy figure that sort of looms over the world. People talk about him, but it's all in hushed breath. So unfortunately, you lose John Malkovich, except possibly his voice, if they decide to keep his voice.
I feel like you can recast that role anyway, honestly. Yeah. Doesn't scream Malkovich.
Yeah, just something, a threatening voice is essentially what you've got. And so then you can focus more time on Eragon learning magic from Brom. He doesn't find out about the Dragon Rider just yet. There's a bit of swordplay. It's all sort of very montagey. Before they eventually surprise attack by the Razak.
You're keeping the surprise attack.
Yes, but I'm doing it differently.
Okay. Hey! Jingle, jingle, jingle.
In this particular case, it's basically straight after they're coming out of a town, and they're basically being tormented by these hidden figures. And it's very much just sort of in and out, and if it isn't for a big sort of distraction by Saphira, who at this point has now grown into a sort of youngish, but not like a sort of a teenager dragon, basically.
Sure. She growing her hair emo or something like that too?
No, basically she can probably fly for a long period of time, but she can't do really anything else.
Okay, cool.
And it's that sort of distraction that just causes the Razak to reassess their tactics and disappear.
They're not dying now. Good.
No.
Good.
So it's sort of like, oh crap, we're being followed. What the fuck are we going to do? And so they keep going. And throughout this time, you have the occasional view of Eragon's dreaming whenever he sleeps. Instead of just the once that happens in the movie, it's shorter aspects with no dialogue. It's just random flashes of this battered and tortured figure that we know as Arya from the first part of from the opening scene, but Eragon knows nothing about. He's just like, oh shit, someone needs me, possibly. Who is this person? What the fuck's going on? Now we're being hunted. Bah! He doesn't quite go bah.
Aww, would have been my favourite part.
Whatever the fantasy medieval version of bah is.
Huzzah!
Verily!
Verily. Yeah, good. Alright.
I feel I'm taking a little long with this, so I'll try and wrap it up quickly.
It's hefty, yeah, go for it.
But basically, they basically get intercepted by Durza. In his sort of castle, they sort of stumble upon it rather than, they sort of are led to it by just constant coincidences, apparently, but really set up by the Razak that you see sort of hiding there, forest fires and sort of stuff, but they're sort of forced off the trail into this dark, dingy outpost rather than the big castle where she's actually kept. And they basically kidnap Eragon. He wakes up. Oh crap, it's the girl in my vision. What the fuck am I doing here? Before eventually being broken out by Saphira, Brom, and the new introduced stranger of... Murta. Why do I keep forgetting his name?
Yeah, generic name.
Yeah, generic name. But in the last few minutes, big battle, last few minutes, Brom is sort of snark attack. And this time it's not, surprise, he's dead. It's, he's been battling this whole time. He's held up his own. But a stray shot has hit him and he's bleeding out, basically. So you have that bit more of, he doesn't just look like, needless sacrifice, wee.
Eragon, no, I need to continue the plot.
Exactly, and you have both sides just sort of have to make a hasty retreat after a lot of damage has occurred. Brom, unfortunately, dies after having a nice little dragon wag. From that movie, I actually kind of like that moment.
Yeah, it's
a nice
sweet.
little wrap-up. It's sweet. They bury him. They do the whole diamond tomb thing. And basically, we have another short montage of them now trying to hike to the mountains. Instead of just like, we're there, there's a bit, you see them crossing desert, you see them sort of, and so by the time they've gone from there to riding up the mountains, you can see they're a lot more disheveled, but a lot more battle-scarred and like more experienced as fighters, basically. And then you have them enter the castle. They meet the twins rather than just Ajihad.
Yes, I believe so. Something along those lines.
Ajihad. I know that's how it's spelled.
Yeah, Ajihad maybe, something like that, yeah.
And they basically psychically tell, these two are good. We don't get the random prisoner subplot. That reveal of him being the son of one of the evil dragon riders is held on for a future movie.
Oh, interesting.
Basically, I reckon that would be the opening part of Eldest.
Sure.
If that ever got made. So instead, it's like, that's great, but you've seemingly led these guys to our door, because they've been following us, it's no coincidence. Oh crap, the Razak are an actual threat this time. And then it basically just, alright, that's it, we're going to war. And that's a big thing. Instead of having it in the night, it's coming into evening, but like sort of dusk area, and it's all on the ground, basically. They're fighting, there's archers on roofs and things shooting down, but it's more of a sort of Middle-earth type war going on. So you just see lots of skirmishes happening to and from, and eventually it leads down to Eragon finding Derzak on the ground. They sort of have a sort of one-on-one fight. You bring in Derzak's sword, because he has that in the book, instead of just for show, apparently, in the movie. You see it there, but he doesn't use it.
No, he likes to throw, was it knives at him or something like that?
Yeah.
Something generic.
So instead of going for the giant, sort of grandiose dragon, instead you have the shots of Saphira taking out the troops, but you save the fight for Eragon and Durza in, like, the small alleyways of the city, or, like, the random scaffold, cliff sides of the mountains. So no one else is much fighting, and they're just going at it, basically. You see Eragon actually using the training that he learnt from Brom early on, using the sword that he took from Brom, and basically big fight. And Durza gets the upper hand, but a nice assist from Arya and Saphira, last minutes, basically is enough to throw him off for Eragon to get that final killing blow.
Yep, to vampire him.
Yeah, basically. And then the last scene is the aftermath of that war, and basically the Santa recovering, and it's sort of the come together of Eragon, Arya, generic name.
Murtaugh.
Yes. And Saphira basically coming together, and it's like, well, there's still more work to do, basically. And that's it.
Roll credits.
Roll credits.
Cool.
So that is my pitch.
Do you know what your end, sequel teaser would be? You say the dragon, I swear to God.
It's the dragon. No, it's not the dragon. It's basically the sequel teaser is more of sort of the twins just coming back, and it's like there's still sort of, they basically kind of expositionally go, ooh, there's this thing about generic name. I'm not even going to bother at this point trying to say his actual name. He's just generic name.
Sure, okay.
And it's like, And that's sort of their sequel reveal of like, maybe can we trust him? He is the son of the bad guy.
Dun dun dun.
Well, one of the bad guys.
Yeah, sure. Roll credits.
And a final sort of post-credit glisten of the reveal of a bit more of Gallifrax.
Gallifrax.
I don't know.
That sounds like a detergent. Galbatorix.
Galbatorix. I know.
Oh, boy.
It's such a weird name that I just like.
Speaking of weird, did you ever realize like the whole origin behind Eragon? And that it's literally a dragon and a mix of Eragon. So like the era of the dragon riders is gone.
I did not realize that.
That's literally what his name means. And I remember when I first time I heard that, I'm like, yeah, that feels like something a teenager would make.
Yep.
Yeah, so, I mean, it kind of fits, but when you realize, like, dear God, it's so obvious. So, yeah, wow, okay, very extensive then. Yeah, many thoughts. That's got to be the most elaborate do it differently we've had so far.
Yeah, I have many thoughts.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of ways to improve this movie.
And I'm sorry for all those who just got a hefty lot of, this is boring old pitch. I will try and improve my storytelling in the future.
Oh, no, I think people got the gist. Yeah. No, interesting. I appreciate how much thought you put into that, so... Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely sounds like a better movie, and I'll definitely watch it, so... Yeah, I mean... Well, luckily, at least it's quite different from mine as well.
Oh, that's
which
good.
is good. So, yeah, I've taken a very, very different approach, and essentially going to pitch a completely different movie. So, considering how much this film borrows from Star Wars... I'm going to borrow a little bit more and make a prequel. So set the prequel basically during the Dragon Riders, like seeing them at the height of their powers, so on and so forth. You see Galbatorix sort of rising up, basically recreating Revenge of the Sith in medieval fantasy times with all the same actors, but good. And I would personally like the person to direct this film, because as we mentioned previously, I think the creative team behind it is probably the biggest problem with this movie. I would bring on Guillermo del Toro to direct this, because honestly...
Hefty.
Yeah, I mean, he would bring such an interesting take and flavour, and considering how kind of generic and flat fantasy the film was... like Guillermo del Toro would be the absolute best way to basically spice it up and make it interesting. Like, imagine all the dragon designs he'd be able to come up with. So.
And now they're fighting robots.
Okay, maybe not quite that far, but even so, I feel like it'd be
Fish people?
Yeah, I can get behind that. Shape of Water. I remember hearing a little while ago, it's like, so what are your initial thoughts on the Shape of Water secretly being part of the Dark Universe? So, hey, you never know, it makes sense. So yeah, but anyway, I feel like Guillermo del Toro would be the absolute best for this production. Obviously, it'd set it up on a much more interesting note than the books itself. It would distinguish from the book series as well, and like forging its own path. It means the first film, isn't quite so generic and flat as the book itself is. So it basically tries to flip the whole concept on its head for a franchise starter for it. And obviously it would take away some of the surprise that would happen later in that. There's probably a way you can still maintain that, but I really think that would just make for a much more interesting project. Basically all I want is for Guillermo del Toro to make a movie with dragons, so, that's what it boils down to. That's all anyone can really hope for.
Fair enough. Short and sweet.
Yeah! Exactly.
Which is probably a good thing, because I went way over time.
Making up for us. Right, so what have you been doing /watching /surviving /eating recently?
Oh, eating, that's a new one.
Yeah, I'm spicing it up this week. Oh, get it? Spice eating? His glare is telling me that he got it.
I'm not justifying that with a response.
Alright,
so I have most recently read a graphic novel /comic, depending on how you want to go with it. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe again.
Ah, yes. What a classic. Again.
Yes, so this is basically the spiritual successor to the Deadpool Kills series, which was originally Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Deadpool Kills the Literary Universe, and then Deadpool Kills Deadpool. The first one, though, being the original Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe was a very dark take on the very comedic Deadpool. Okay, so Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe is a very sort of dark take on the character of Deadpool, where basically his fourth wall breaks are less comedic and more, there's something wrong with him, he's now being tortured, and everything is meaningless. A very sort of simplistic, nihilistic approach to life.
It's basically if Deadpool became Rick from Rick and Morty, and
but
then tried to murder everyone. Yeah.
So that's the original, and it's sort of held up as a bit of a classic nowadays. This this spiritual successor is basically another out-of-canon story. This time, though, it's Deadpool being brainwashed by a conglomerate of villains, including MODOK, Red Skull, Doctor Doom, and a few others.
All the big ones.
All the big ones basically conspire to brainwash him. And so what he is thinking is he's basically in a whole bunch of other happy comic-style situations. He's like just fighting these generic Z-list villains that MODOK has made up, and really he's just killed the rest of the X-Force without even knowing it.
Oh, wow.
And you then follow basically, while he's going about unknowingly killing off a lot of the Marvel Universe and struggling, a lot of other sort of the more darker sort of heroes. So you have Cable, you have Moon Knight, you have Gwenpool, a few other characters just on his tail trying to work out what's happening, why is he killing everyone. And they sort of come to the realization that he's not in control. He leaves secret messages like help in his noodles, I think it was.
His alphabets.
Yes. And the story is basically them trying to stop Deadpool from killing everyone else. I don't want to go too much further into it because then it gets really spoilery. So I'd recommend just if you're a fan of Deadpool, I really recommend reading it. If you're not such a fan of Deadpool, it might be a little lost on you. But if you are a fan of Marvel, maybe worth a shot. Have a read of the first few pages and the blurb and make up your mind. But I found it really interesting.
Yeah, nice. I'll have to borrow that after you, actually. Yeah, I've read Deadpool because of the Marvel Universe, but I haven't read the follow-up yet. So, very exciting. Cool. Well, for me, to keep a consistent theme going, I just have another obscure movie to recommend to everyone. So this week, I'm actually going international and recommending Trollhunters, which is a found footage horror film from Norway, which is basically about a bunch of teenagers who end up meeting this real-life troll hunter who sort of introduces them to all the different species of troll as they go on hunting them, basically. It's exactly how the title sounds. The best way I could probably describe this movie was if a David Attenborough documentary met the Blair Witch Project with a healthy dose of the Brothers Grimm sprinkled on top of it. And it is really, really good. I mean, there's a few problems, like there's a bunch of narrative leaps. And if you don't like found footage, then this probably isn't going to change your mind. But I found it a really, really interesting film. And probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite take on the found footage genre. Like, sometimes it can be pretty dicey, but I'd put this up there with Chronicle as some of the best found footage movies I've seen. So, yeah, I'd definitely give it a recommend. Even though it is horror, I didn't find it particularly scary, more interesting and compelling. So, I mean, if that's what scares you away, I'd recommend still giving it a shot. But it's a very good movie, and I really feels like it deserves a form of a cult following, which I don't think it quite has yet. Yep, it's in sort of that wheelhouse, but I don't think enough people have seen it yet for it to actually have a cult.
I'd just like to point out, for anyone who does want to go hunting for troll hunters, don't imagine what I just thought and go for the Netflix animated series. It sounds very different.
Sure, it's very, very different. I have actually, side note, I have seen that series and really like that series as well. Also created by Guillermo del Toro. Funny, a bit of a theme. So yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely a grown adult who still watches animated kid shows on Netflix. What are you talking about? So it's actually really good. I'd actually give it a recommend. Once you get past the first 16 or 17 episodes, then it really comes alive. God, I sound like an anime guy. That's terrifying.
So your recommendation is both kinds of troll hunters?
Yes, both kinds of troll hunters. Preferably the Norwegian one, because it's probably better. But yes. So
excellent.
Just go out there and hunt them trolls. Right, so for next week, we're going to be going into space with an anthropomorphic speaking animal who makes wisecracks.
I didn't even get that. And I wrote the episode.
Do I have to do the... Oh, it's actually did it today? Wow, we're flipping the whole franchise on its head tonight, aren't we? Oh boy. It's Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to try and make it sound like it was Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was hoping that's what you were going to secretly go for. But no, it's Ratchet and Clank. The movie, obviously.
Yes, based on the video games.
Yes. Yeah, so that'd be interesting. Alright. So thank you for listening to this episode of Medium Shift. If you want to contact us further, you can find us at mediumshift@gmail.com. We accept all positive comments and negative comments, and even recommendations on episodes you may want us to do in the future. Don't recommend anything too weird, because honestly, we're still functioning adults who don't have enough time to watch a 20-season miniseries to see what film it's based on. But yeah, just send us a link to something. We'll be more than happy to check out something new. Alright, until next time, fare thee well.
Bye. Bye.